Well, I feel good about this, don't you?
I do, especially since because
But I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you.
we are looking to continue the Terrance Howard conversation. We the last episode there was massive tangents in there. So while we did talk for well over an hour, there's only like half an hour of it was actual Terrance Howard.
I don't know. I feel like there's so much surrounding that particular topic, and it's kind of becoming inflammatory now.
Well, yeah, because it's been about a month almost. Well, I guess like 3 weeks since it popped.
And yeah, now people are just coming out of the woodwork talking about this chair is so noisy. Just talking about, like making fun and disproving or not even disproving, but just kind of verbally dismantling the entire.
Well, but like you were saying,
because of one or two things that he says.
But like you said, they were also going after him. So the same thing with like Graham Hancock. They weren't attacking his statements or, the information he had. They were attacking him personally.
Well, they're particularly attacking, and this is one thing that I can't, like, I think I told you I would rather he just keep the 1 × 1 = 2 theorem out of his conversation, because I think it kind of muddies the waters. Like, after you've got somebody's attention, then you can take them onto that. But like,
I feel
that's a huge leap, and I get it. It's to him, it's intrinsic to what he's trying to.
I wouldn't even say intrinsic. I would say integral.
Integral.
Well, because again, he's attempting to break down the barrier of linear math as opposed to universal or circular math. So, I mean, really what this is why I like it.
Circular, spherical is what you're saying.
Well,
you're talking about a 3-dimensional reality, like using a linear mathematics doesn't work anyway. It's basically calculus is what you're trying to, but it's calculus on steroids, because now you're adding like a whole, like, and I've never taken calculus, but I mean, to try and figure out like the rough area or exact area as you can of like a strange shaped pool or something like that. There's no other way to figure that out without using something like calculus.
Well, and so, I mean,
breaking it down into its smallest piece and then adding all that up and then figuring,
And I mean, and that's why I'm like, I feel the 1 × 1 aspect is integral, is because he's literally attempting to challenge the standardized mathematics system that we're really, habituated to. And the reason being is, unlike what most people do, like we were just saying, is they're attacking personally. He's not attacking anyone. He's not saying anyone is wrong. He's saying it's not correct, which is a big difference. He's not saying that the system doesn't work. He's saying that the system isn't consistent, let alone it's not consistent with the actual universal math or what all of this around us is governed by. So how are we going to use this math system that isn't an exact representation of what we're literally dealing with? So you have to be able to take that in. And again, because he's not putting anyone down, he's looking at the evidence and he's giving you the information so that we can base a logical, understanding of it. So we can actually have a grasping of what it means. But he's also attempting to break down barriers while doing it, because again, we're habituated to this mathematics system.
Excuse me. I assume he throws that in there because a part of what he's trying to do there is get people who are on the brink to actually thinking about this to realize that they have to break out of the paradigm of what they're usually used to focusing on scientifically. And I don't get into the whole mathematics side of it thing with him as much as I do. Basically, I stumbled onto him. I think I was telling you the first time, because not only is he a huge Walter Russel fan, but he also, he was born with that
Synesthesia.
that particular condition that makes his view on the world very unique.
And and I like the way you put that. It is true. It's caused him to have alternate perceptions than what most of us, I mean, like literally most of us, the majority of the human race, we perceive things differently. We all take in the same input, but his brain is able to ingest and process on a completely different level because of that, which is going back to the first part of the conversation where I had brought up the idea that, we have the RAC, the Reticulum Activation Center. If someone with synesthesia, if that part of your brain is turned off or being bypassed or, whatever, you're going to have completely different perceptions within all of that. But it's also going to limit or restrict the amount of limitations on ingesting that information. So you not only have the ability to take in additional, you also have the ability to look at it or perceive it from a multitude of angles, which, I think in and of itself really lends its hand to being open to these kinds of ideas. But it also, I think, lends its hand to giving you that perception that it's like everything we're being told is not correct. And not that it's wrong, it's not correct.
It's not a full picture of what's actually going on. I think that was my problem principally, or my positive view on his idea of his new mathematics, which he named after his own name. Which is, this is a whole nother thing we don't need to get into. But
we don't need to talk about who did what.
But I do understand the value that he puts in it, saying that basically that we don't live in a 2-dimensional world. We live in a 3-dimensional world.
A 4-dimensional, really. You got to put time in there.
Exactly. So, in factoring that in, like the mathematics can't run in a straight line because straight lines don't exist in nature.
Well, yeah, because that was the point that Joe Rogan said, where he's like, we can't. He's like, we can draw a straight line. He's like, no, you can't. He's like, because even if you look at it underneath an electronic microscope, it's all these little circles. It's these dots.
It's a bunch of little dots. So we're like, you get far down enough, and it's a bunch of wiggly lines.
Yeah, so that's not even a straight line.
You go further than that, and it's even.
Yeah, who knows?
Straighter lines, and then it goes back to wiggly. Like that's what Alan Watts used to say. Like, you keep zooming in, it's going to change. It's going to flip flop. It's going to, appearances. And I think that's one of the really interesting things that came out of that conversation for me. One of my takeaways was that you can't trust the appearances. You can't trust appearances of anything.
Well, yeah, and that's the story that
when you feel like you're in the most dire situation, maybe everything is just right for everything to go your way.
Well, and that really goes back to the RAC and how your brain allows you to perceive things. But yeah, the point I was making, the story that Terrance referenced, was how our perception, our sensory inputs can change our mindset. He's telling the story of how an individual's on his way home, and he knows he gets to a certain point, he can see the mountains, he can smell the mountains, and his brain's like, well, I don't see it, I don't smell it.
He says he sees the mountain, and to him, he knows he's close to home once he sees the mountain. But
all of his other senses,
his eyes go back into his brain and say, hey, I see the mountain. The mountain's on, up yonder. We'll be home soon. And the rest of his body's going, well, I don't smell it. I don't taste it. I can't touch it,
Yeah, so we must not be.
And I think maybe that's supposed to be a lesson on don't trust something just because you can see it, or don't assume that that's all there is to it.
Well, yeah.
You could apply that to books. You could apply that to people that you've met. You could apply that to anything.
All of your input.
If you get to know somebody enough to be able to find a trigger for that person, to flip that switch, to make yourself the most important, interesting person in the room just because you know how to listen to them when they have something to say. Like, and And being able to do that at the right, you know, that's something that's really important, I think, about like ego death, if you can figure that out. Like, or if you've ever had that through a circumstance.
You know, and so, you know, as you say that, this reminds me of an experience I had. I was working for a large corporation. I won't say who, but I'm working for a large corporation. And I want to say 2 or 3 positions under the vice president of the department. So I have like 2 other managers above me and then like my literal boss. And we're all on a large group call because it's a big department. And there's probably close to 50 of us in the entire department. And we're on this large conference call, but we're all video, you know, zooming in or whatever. But before the meeting starts, as everybody's coming in, the VP, the guy who's running the whole show, always played like some music and just kind of chatted with some of us and just, you know, nonchalant, whatever. Well, I just start riffing with him right back and forth. Like, you're just a dude just like I'm a dude. Like, let's just chat and like, you know, whatever.
Absolutely.
And him and I are going back and forth and having a really great time with it. Fast forward after the meeting, my boss, you know, my direct manager pulls me aside and she's like, I can't believe you did that. I'm like, what do you mean? I would never have done that. That is, how do you do that? Like, and she's, you know, I'm thinking
Did I do something wrong?
Well, so I'm thinking it's like I'm getting reprimanded, but she's literally flabbergasted by the fact that I just went straight to the VP and was just talking to him like a person. I'm like, but he's a person just like I'm a person. You know, so like you were saying, where you can flip that mentality where all of a sudden you're listening, you're actively listening, and you become the most interesting person in the room because you're willing to let that happen. There is no ego for me on that. You're a person, I'm a person, I have an opinion, you have an opinion. Let's talk. It's that easy.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I haven't had the opportunity because I am still pretty much, I keep to myself in my job, but if there's opportunities whenever you find yourself in a position where you're not like actively working, but like you're communicating with someone else, it's this technique called mirroring.
Yeah, we've talked about this.
Yeah, where it has a lot to do with human psychology as it revolves around kind of this very mechanistic machine-like thing that we have that, you know, it's called a brain that runs the whole thing.
But this is also how we learn.
That there's neurons in your body that are triggered by mirroring your emotions. I can make myself seem more like you and hence make me more interesting to you as a person. And a lot of that just has to do with not only mirroring like the body language, like the comfortable, you know, whatever body language that other person is putting off, but then also like not reiterating, but actually repeating the last several words that they say at the end of a statement.
Well, yeah, because that, like you said, psychologically, that dictates or indicates to the other person, they heard me.
They heard me.
And that's a validation aspect.
Right.
You know? But, I mean, and this is why...
It's almost like giving you punctuation, too. And not only that, and that was the really interesting thing when you start reading, because it was a book on hostage negotiation, which is where the whole thing started from that I read. And the guy was like a huge proponent for that particular technique, the mirroring technique, because he said, when you're in a normal social exchange and you want to know something, you ask a question. But in asking a question, it puts you in the position of power, meaning the person that you're asking the question of is going to feel like you're taking something from them.
Okay.
To give you an answer, it's not going to come as freely. And he found that by utilizing this particular technique in a situation where, you know, you get a phone call or you finally make a connection with the hostage taker and they're inside the building, right? And you're trying to figure out what their demands are, what's going on. And like the first 10 seconds, he's basically got the guy's full attention. And the guy tells him, you you could tick it off. Like he tells him all the information he wants to know without asking a single question.
Okay.
And it's just by using that mirroring technique. So the guy says something and he just repeats the last 3 words, and then he continues to, it's more than just punctuation on your sentence. So you say something and I repeat the last 3 words that you just said. And it's almost like asking you to go on.
Well, right.
It's a weird, it's like putting a trampoline underneath somebody.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good analogy.
Like it's just, it continues the momentum and it's almost automatic because it goes past your defenses. So like somebody asks you a question, they're asking you for information. And it's like, it's something you have to, I'm trying to find the right words to put that, but it's something you have to provide in that exchange, and it feels more like it's something you have to willingly give, whereas this doesn't feel like a question at all, and it's just you offer up everything.
Well, yeah,
because he's telling you like these people they're scared, they're nervous. Something the best way that you can handle that situation is not by even giving them their demands. It's literally just by listening to them.
Yeah.
And the power of that and what that does. And like these people will spill their guts. And then the next thing you know, it's like, well, why don't you just give me some people?
Well, see, and this is why I like,
I think we're starting off on the wrong foot. Why don't you just give me some people and we can keep talking about this?
Well, and this is why I think Joe Rogan's approach to having his guests on, because I mean, if anybody who really watches him, he does usually have a talking sheet of sorts where he has different questions or things that he wants to bring up.
But it's still it's very open-ended.
But he doesn't always ask questions per se. Sometimes after a guest says something, he almost mirrors them in a sense where he's giving back that same information. And, at times he's like, do you mind going further? Or, he just kind of says it and then they're like, well, yeah. And then they just keep going. I mean, that was a big thing with.
So that's what that mirroring thing does, because I'm reiterating what you just said. Like the first thing you said was, I know that you're listening to me now. When you do that to me, when I say
I was
something,
heard,
I feel like I was heard. And that makes you want to continue, like automatically.
Well, yeah, because I mean, you saw that with Terrance. Is he would go into something, and then he would call on Jamie, young Jamie, to pull some stuff up, and in pulling that stuff up, he goes into it, and then Joe is like, "Oh, well, because I mean this and that." So he's not asking a question. He's like, "Oh, I see what you're saying because this is what it is," and "Oh, like you said, this is what it is," and Terrance just kept tearing into it. But I mean, I also think
I know what you're talking about, but like literally even more so. Like you're not changing the words, you're not changing.
Yeah, I'm
literally last 3 words, 4 words. Yeah,
I'm on a whole nother point at this. On this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, he got to a place with him where he's diving. The point that I was about to make is, so he's diving so deep into it because he has so much stuff that he needs to explain. But just like with us, when we get into something, it's like, all right, hold on, I got to preface this. And it's like, I got to back up now. It's like what I should have told you about was, and he kept doing that, but in an attempt to continue to move forward. But at the same time, it's like, he's just constantly going back and forth. I mean, you got to a point where, I mean, even by the end, they're both saying, it's like, dude, we could be doing 100 hours of this. And it's like, you're still only scratching the surface. Which, the point you were making earlier where people are already attacking Terrance and specifically on the mathematics of it. It's like, dude, while that's an integral part, it's a minuscule component.
I think that's, if there's a way to understand that, if finding the overstanding point of that, if you know what I mean, may require a few steps to get there. And that's why I was saying maybe that's not something you throw into the works right off the bat. That was my big criticism. Because like I said, I'm a fan. I've been following him for a while now, and I think it's fascinating. Like, fuck him as an actor. Like, that's such a small, minuscule part of his life.
It really is.
And I felt, I don't know, in a way I felt kind of hurt a little bit by some of the stuff I was seeing online, although I did expect it, like I was telling you. But like people basically attacking his intelligence and, saying that he basically didn't make it out of university because he was too smart for the professors or something like that. And then basically poking fun at this 1 times 1 equals 2. The reason I'm so fascinated by it though is I feel like if anybody could have a better concept of how the world works, it's somebody who sees it as one. Somebody who sees it all its little idiosyncrasies. Like they see a lot more of that. I mean, like, this is one of my huge life theories and I've told you before with anybody who's on the spectrum, you know, so, what's the term? Sorry.
Which
Asperger's
term?
and
autism.
Autism.
Yeah, the autism spectrum, which
that I've
don't get me started on that crap. Okay. Sorry.
I have this theory that basically they're getting
sensory overload
more of the reality.
Yeah. Which I mean, that also.
I don't think it's necessarily a disability, but
it's not
in that way.
Don't get me started.
In that way, it can be socially disabling, though.
Well, and I wouldn't use that word disabling, but I know what you mean by that. And so going back to the point I'd made on our previous conversation with this, where the possibility that maybe somebody with synesthesia, their RAC is not working. Well, in that same regard, maybe somebody who's on the spectrum, as they want to call it, maybe they're lacking some form of a filter. And yes, they're going on literal sensory overload because their brain is attempting to ingest as well as go through all of this data. You know, I mean, that's something to think about in that capacity, because I mean, what are you going to, I mean, you as a standard human being, when you get even slightly overwhelmed, what do? You damn near shut down. And that's on occasion. What if this was your literal life? If every waking moment, this is what you were under, was literal sensory attack, how is that going to make you feel or react or interact?
Oh, it's so much to take in all the time. And I think most of us feel the effects of it, even if we don't necessarily perceive all of it.
You know, like register it, basically, like actually witness it as it's happening.
And that's whether you want to call it the RAC or whatever it is that is filtering that out. Maybe that's a normal trait for humanity. Maybe that's, and this is kind of part of that same theory I have with certain disorders, is that maybe that's something that's coming back into the mix that was filtered out at some point through natural selection because it wasn't necessary for survival.
Okay.
And that maybe that's something that you gain as you become a more advanced people. I don't want to say civilization per se, because I think this is one of the things that puts that stepping stone to make super advanced civilizations more possible.
Yeah.
You know, to be able to see things not the way everybody else says that they are, but to literally see things and the structure of things and how they work. Who are you to say I'm wrong?
Well, yeah, and you know what? Going back to how Terrance was basically using, or I mean, I wouldn't say using, but he had found that Walter Russel had already perceived or stated a few things that he also had felt himself.
The spiral universe.
And not only that, but to the further extent of where he's looking at the periodic table, that's basically doing the same in a sense. But he even put it to the point of Walter Russel having that ability to perceive, understand, and regurgitate, put this information out there. He himself was still stuck within a linear mathematics system, which limited his ability to take this stuff and go further, which is what Terrance was able to do. And, you know, I feel it's because, you know, with the synesthesia is that he's more open. There's a lot more information. So he's not being restricted by the typical constraints that our bodies or brains would do to us. So it allows him to not even just perceive, but be open to, willing to accept.
Absolutely. Well, no, I'm thinking about a lot of.
No, I know it's just the dramatic pause. And it's
I'm
just
thinking
like
about things that pertaining to everything that you're saying right now. So one aspect of it that I found was really interesting, and some people were also poking at, was
the Terrance Howard conversation.
The Terrance Howard conversation in particular was that he kind of went through a health transformation after meeting the woman that he's married to now, I guess.
Yeah, right.
And part of that transformation was, I guess, taking these supplements several times a day. I mean, he's got like a special...
Yeah, like tinctures or something.
Something of that, yeah.
Because one of them was drops. He was taking
he didn't make
literal
reference
drops.
to exactly what it was he was taking, but he did say, like taking X. Yeah, I think it was oregano oil or something like that.
Well, yeah, he basically put it as it was a cleansing tincture of sorts.
Right. There was some kind of it was a detox. Like
He called it a detox. Yeah.
He was supposed to detox and take vitamins regularly.
He was saying it was helping him strip these excess metals out of him.
I wonder if with all this stuff that he's into and researching, what if he's taking monoatomic silver and gold?
Well, and you know what? I think there's something to be said for that because I know like colloidal silver. Thank you. There's, while there's not a lot of evidence because most will see it as like hoo-ha or voodoo or whatever else.
No, they use it on wounds all the time.
Well, but there's not enough peer-reviewed, journaled information, evidence. So while there is information out there and it does correlate in a very positive fashion that shows the medicinal capacities of it, because we're not allowed to have that information on this, grand scale, we're being limited by, the science community or...
You have to find old books.
Very old books.
Because they used to write about this kind of stuff. And like the big pharmaceutical companies that exist today, when they stumbled on things that worked, they studied the shit out of them and they wrote and published books on it before they found a way to debunk it because we created something that does it and it's even better because it makes us money.
Yep.
So you have to go back in history, like turn of the century where people
1800s and
people went to the doctor every 10 years because that's all they could afford to do. Unless somebody was seriously hurt, everything was dealt with at home. And you grew your own remedies in your backyard.
Yeah.
Like this was normal. So I think last time we were talking, I made mention of what was the one thing that I've taken before? The
mineral spirits?
Not the turpentine that you used to mix paint with, but the it was a very specific, it was like basically a cold press. Like it's a natural substance that comes from pine trees.
Yeah, I don't
something. It's a very specific, and there's a certain way to do it, which makes it beneficial for health. People used to do it all the time. And I believe Merck actually wrote a book like this thick on all the remedies that you can use this particular.
Yeah, spirits of turpentine, I think you should call it, or something like that.
Gum spirits of turpentine.
There, yeah, gum spirits of turpentine is what you said.
And it's the way that where you get it from and how you process it. That makes it the edible type. You can't just go into your hardware store and pick up a thing of turpentine and you take very small doses of it. Like you don't overdo it. Even if I think the highest dose that I've taken was like 2 teaspoons, and you have to mix it with something and like down it as fast as you can because it literally tastes horrible. But there's no parasite that can live within your body when that's running through your body. Like it literally pushes it all out. So
yeah, it makes it an inhabitable.
This is something you will not find. And if you're lucky, your doctor might have heard something about it if they study old school remedies. But chances are most doctors these days, if they're not getting paid to sell a prescription, they're not going to tell you about it.
Well, yeah. I mean, this goes back to, Terrance was talking about how a lot of the research that he was doing, he was finding these older books from the 1700s and the 1800s, and he was devouring them. And there was all of this very useful, vital knowledge that has been completely stripped from our current society. And like you said, it's because it's a monetary gain.
a lot of interesting things too that have maintained as historical vestiges of certain occurrence that held like a predominant role in people's lives, specifically Amanita muscaria mushroom, which has shown up in all kinds of art and folklore for
multiple cultures across many millennia.
And I love the claim that the Amanita muscaria mushroom is where Santa Claus in the story comes from.
I mean, it totally makes sense.
I mean, weren't we talking about that?
Oh, we've talked about this several times.
The
on air and off.
Yeah, the Siberian reindeer and how they would eat it and basically
poop it out.
Well, you could actually collect their urine. Was the thing that they said, because there was still enough of it in there, and it would actually process the stuff that was bad for your body out of it.
It would sterilize it more.
Because apparently Amanita muscaria, you have to be very careful how you dose with it. Whereas the typical magic mushroom that people are used to, psilocybin producing,
you got there's lion's mane,
cubensis or something like that.
I don't know all these terms.
I'm probably butchering the shit out of that, but
JD would do it too, so it's okay.
But I mean, everything from the Smurfs and the houses that they lived in,
right?
I mean, how many times have you driven past somebody's yard and they have one of those little dwarfs, one of those little lawn gnomes?
Yeah,
and it's standing right next to a giant mushroom that's red with little white puffs on it.
Yeah,
little white spots. Amanita muscaria. The idea of just fascinates me with the whole Santa Claus thing, because this is a time. So it's a time, if you think about it, winter took on a whole different role way back in the day, because.
Let me ask you this: what does this have to do with Terrance Howard?
To me, it actually, there's a big tie-in, because.
Well, then good.
I feel like the first time I heard about his condition, synesthesia, what that sounded like to me. It sounded like people explaining a psychedelic experience where you can taste
purple
colors.
Tastes delicious.
Right.
You jokingly said it several times, but yeah.
So I wonder if it's not like one of those things where, it's allowing you to scratch behind the surface of reality and be able to see through that. Maybe whether you have a particular condition or, and I wonder, like, people that have synesthesia, if they take mushrooms, does it not affect them at all? Or does it make them see normal?
Right. You're right.
Like, does it turn it off? Like, what happens here? And like, because basically the active chemicals in hallucinogenic chemicals, whatever, I forget what compounds, the particular role that they play is kind of in releasing, kind of like you said, like the hippocampus to just kind of run wild and, maybe not let as much stay back. Like, it kind of releases more information to your brain, and maybe that's what you're experiencing. You get the tunnel vision. You're in a world of your own, people will say,
Well, yeah. And
is that not, it's brought on the wrong way, but is that not maybe like scratching through reality to see what's actually behind, like seeing the gears turn? I think I've heard that referenced when it comes to like taking something like DMT, which we've talked about before too, that is naturally occurring within the human brain. What's
naturally occurring in most living organisms on this planet.
And I think there may actually be some reference to that's what they speak of in the chemical wedding, the union of these two chemicals that pass through your body every 28, 29 days, something like that.
Your lunar cycle, I think, is 28 days.
Well, it's
28 and a half or 28 and a third, or yeah.
It's not exact. I know that.
Because our math is not correct.
So,
just saying.
So yeah, I wonder, like, same thing under DMT. You see impossible shapes, impossible geometry, I think is what people call it. And when you hear it described, it almost feels like an organic being, like almost like a continuous, multi-layered, multifaceted shape, like an impossible geometry.
We'll see.
Like a shape that has, like, you can't possibly fathom.
This is why
depth and all that, because it's just constantly.
This is why I like where Terrance brought in the idea of the math that we utilize now, while it makes logical sense to us, is because it is a logical system that when you deconstructed the flower of life presented itself in this fashion, but missing an integral part. So it makes sense to us because it is logical and it is correct, but we're not being told everything.
Well, I mean, does something like money function on a linear?
Oh, it does.
I mean, that was my whole thing for everyday math. I don't think it makes a difference using a linear, two-dimensional math.
Well, and I don't think that was his expression. I think his was more of, if we're so habituated to linear mathematics, it negates our ability to perceive anything that's outside of that, as well as his attempt to get us to understand, as you put it, the spherical universal math, which is what governs everything. How are you going to understand or perceive any of that? How are you going to be able to trust that? How are you able to even just want to be open to that? Because you're so closed off to it. And that's why, going to that point of, he said, when you properly deconstruct the flower of life, all of this stuff is there. I mean, I think he was saying that was a part of where they put together the Saturn model, where they did not use gravity at all.
Get to that too. I wanted to get to that.
Well, yeah, because he put it as pressure differentials. And that's the thing is, with these pressure differentials is...
He did really well describing specifically that part of Walter Russell's work. Because that's basically everything he's trying to do with that is an extension off Walter Russell's work.
Well, and
because Walter Russell says the thing we call gravity is it's an effect of the one true universal electric current, like the one true electric.
Well, it's not even that it's an effect. Well, so
we have an electromagnetic universe,
right? And that's where I think Walter Russell was putting it as an effect, whereas Terrance is like, it's not an effect; it's a idea. It's a way to understand what these pressure differentials are. That's why he was saying with well,
you've got it coming. You've got it coming. Literally, these electromagnetic waves are coming from every angle, 360 degrees.
It's spherical,
three-dimensional, coming from all sides. You've got this, and that's what we call gravity, is those forces pushing back.
No, he would not pushing back. He put it as pressure differentials. So it's as things are becoming homeostasis, where you're trying to have equality. You want balance. The universe wants balance.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why, so he was breaking down the aspect of most of our scientists want to express outside of our atmosphere as a void. There's nothing there, other than, obviously like the molecules, this and the other, but it's a void of stuff. And it's like, no, there's always these pressure differentials.
What little we know about physics, we know that's impossible to state. What you see is nothing. What I see is an amazing amount of energy packed into each square inch of that nothing space.
Well, yeah, but he also said
there is energy in all of that, just holding it together, because it's holding up the existence of everything else. And whether you want to call it dark matter, dark energy, whatever.
Well, yeah, but that's why Terrance was saying the reason why our scientists utilizing the idea of one gravity, utilizing the idea of gravity as a actual component, not a understanding. But then on top of it, expressing things into the terms where we're utilizing the idea of a void. It's like, well, those aren't going to give you actual correct outputs because you haven't taken everything into the equation. You know, you're restricting your own math in that capacity. But we just keep perpetuating that cycle.
He's also a huge fan of Nikola Tesla.
Massive.
Yeah.
Well, and again,
which is another thing that just completely like, I mean, like, how many times have we not spoken about it? Would be easier to say.
Yeah, no shit.
But
yeah, that was going back to a point you had made earlier where you said Terrance was continuing Russell's work. I don't agree with that. If I recall correctly,
well, specifically with the planetoid that they had made, because
so my point on that was what I recall is Terrance said, I had perceived or had these understandings. You know, he saw the periodic table in the same expression that Walter Russell did. However, upon realizing that, he's like, hey, I thought that shit too. So he wasn't so much continuing his work as he was continuing
the work.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But from Terrance's
that's why he couldn't put that book down though once he got it.
Yeah, right. But yeah, from his perception is I had already understood these things, and I just found somebody else that also understood these things, and it made
they've already been working at it. So
well, yeah. So he was able to take some of that information and continue going on the same path he was already doing. So you know, whether he actually came across it or not, I feel he still would have derived at these conclusions. It just may have been sooner or later.
Yeah, he actually reached out to the acting president or
the society
COO of the school that they still, I believe, still is in operation.
You had said that.
But it's a very secluded place. Like getting there is, you basically have to wind your way up a mountain to get there.
Well,
Shenandoah or something.
Shenandoah?
Shannon, I forget what it's called.
I'm going to say Shenandoah is down in that's Virginia. Shasta?
No.
Definitely not there. Redacted. Redacted.
Well, you can look it up. But Walter Russell.
Did you guys?
Got a
write that down.
What is it called? A college of science and philosophy.
I don't know. This is where having JD would be.
Yeah.
But you know,
we don't have to look nothing up. We're doing this old school.
I mean, you mean talking out our asses? Pretty much. Yeah.
I mean, you know, I occasionally read a book now and then while I'm tied to the truck.
Easy there, go.
Yes, well.
But yeah, no. Going back to the Saturn, because you had said you wanted to bring that up as well. The fact that they were able to utilize, as Terrance put it, a proper deconstruction of the flower of life, with the understanding that it is not a void and that there is no gravity. It's just the pressure differentials of molecules interacting, or, you know, all these things having that flow of electronics.
Right. When a pressure condition, that's hard to say. When a pressure condition changes, the aspect and the qualities of the object in question change with it. That was one of his big claims, and that's he said, naturally speaking, you would always have a Goldilocks zone within a solar system somewhere.
At some point on a timeline.
And chances are really good, actually, that you could have life on a planet as such, and mostly because it can have and contain water at that point. And water is basically requirement number one for producing life.
That's our understanding from a scientific perspective, is water would be the main component to provide for the environment for what we call life. But as we've come to find out, there are plenty of environments that are completely void of hydrogen and oxygen as water, and yet life still sustains. Not only that, but I mean, you're talking about like certain bacterium and stuff that make it through the void of space in a absolute horrid condition of, sub-zero temperatures. And yet it traverses it, lands here on this planet, and it reactivates. So, I mean, how is it you're going to tell me that water is necessary for life? That's why I say, from our scientific understanding, what we consider fact, water is the main component to provide the environment for what we would consider life.
Terrance McKenna said we were already invaded by aliens millions of years ago, when asteroids with fungal spores contained in them struck our planet.
Well, because we've talked about this before, like the mycelial network and stuff. Why is it that our brains or bronchioles, all of these things, why is it that root structures, why do they all resemble fungus?
Even down to the computer chip, even the way we think about how to process, we recreate something that we're already
akin to,
utilizing something we're already akin to. Exactly.
Yeah.
That it's been hardwired, literally hardwired into our body.
I mean, I think you can even take it down to the DNA structure, the different strands and things, like even those, as you break down further and further and just wind the spiral, the way the different components interact, there's still this kind of linkage. Like, I mean, it's at the core of everything that we have. But, going back to the whole Goldilocks zone thing, as Terrance put it, if you look at a timeline of these pressure differentials, you can structure out the entire universe, all of the galaxies, and they are consistent. So, Saturn at one point was an Earth, Mars was an Earth, Jupiter was an Earth, and, Venus and Mercury at some point, trillions of years from now,
that was his claim, that
will be an Earth.
As it passes into those different areas beyond the influence of the star, the sun, that the pressure condition changes there. So the chemicals, the literal chemicals that planet is structured of, start morphing into something. I mean, it's what's the word? Transmutation. Transmutation. Yeah. So you're transmuting into
transmogrification.
That's what I wanted to say, and I was like, no, that's not right. That's Calvin and Hobbes. It's a cardboard box with it. I remember that. I'm out of coffee. Damn it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in that I think, because continuing on that model as Venus and Mercury do, then eventually there'd be another one that comes in and another, and like you're just getting until the star itself burns out.
Well, is that what happens? Is the planet gets old enough and it just ends up hitting that Kuiper belt near the end, which was actually an old planet that had
that is a hypothesis.
Smashed. Well, that's basically as far as we could tell. Why else would it be there? Something came in and got smashed.
Well, and I mean, this goes back
there
to
was some smashing involved, and now basically you have this giant ring of debris floating around.
Well, yeah, because I mean, there's two different understandings. So you have one where the life forms that were on Mars, when it was more part of the Goldilocks zone, you had a secondary moon, and you had warring factions. One family on the planet, another one that moved itself to the moon, and they had a power system that they were going to utilize to basically shut down the system. But in doing so, they actually caused an explosion, which is why they left Mars, because they basically decimated their planet. They took the remaining, star cruisers that they had and constructed the hollow moon theory.
This is the Atlantis, isn't it? This is the and Anunnaki too, I guess. I mean, it's.
But then you also go back to you have the Anunnaki, which people want to put it as Planet X, which only so many years, Nibiru,
the dark planet,
as it comes around in its elliptical orbit, it only comes so close to us that we can literally see it. Otherwise, it's just out on this far reach, and it takes thousands of years for it to cycle that way. So, I mean, to me, there's something, and I think Terrance even made reference to it. It's like if you were to actually take the collection of the Kuiper belt and put it all together, it would be the mass of a planet or a satellite of some sort.
Pretty big one too, I think.
Yeah,
At
very
least,
fucking huge.
yeah, at least Earth size.
Well, and that's where I think you get into the Earth 2 theory as well. Like, I mean, but see, and this is the thing is with his mathematics and his understanding of the pressure differentials, all of this stuff is mappable.
Fascinating thing about that story, and this is obviously by nature of anybody that wants to tell a new and fascinating story, although this is a very old story, but as the story goes, it takes the orbit that they take around our sun takes approximately 3,600 years.
Something like that. That's why I said thousands of years, but yeah, it's something like that. I think so.
And maybe somebody with some trickery in their history books can find a way to link certain occurrences that occur every 3,600 years in our past.
Well, because if you do the math on that, that
advancements
puts
in
us
technology and all these other claims that came from and are also biblical in nature. They come from many different texts.
It also lines up with the Younger Dryas. Redacted. Sorry.
Right, but that's not the most recent.
No. But I'm just
Now
saying.
what they're saying is that's not necessarily the most recent flood myth.
No.
But the most recent one was half of that.
Well, yeah, because I think the premise is that as this planet comes close to us, I mean, it's closer or closer because depending on how we line up, but every 3,600-ish years, we're close enough to each other. At one point, they're literally close enough that it throws off our magnetic poles, which is why we could have had the Younger Dryas to begin with, you know, some 12,000-ish years ago, because they threw off our magnetic poles and the planet tilted a little bit further.
And not only that, but probably in coming such close proximity to the sun with no protective ozone to their sky, their planet's going through some ridiculous upheaval all the time. And it must be even worse when it's here. So they're jumping off, trying to get on our planet.
Yeah, right. We're going to go hang out at Burger King for a hot minute. We'll be back.
I'm going to stay here until things cool down.
Literally. Yeah. No, it's
We'll catch you on the way back.
But that's why, I mean, because with all of these things that we talk about this kind of stuff all the time, I felt that the Terrance stuff really just lended its hand to corroborate this stuff.
And I think what I was trying to say with that, though, is that you don't necessarily have to accept everything he's saying like it's fact if you have trouble with that. But I think what's really important to note is that even with all of our massive advancements in science, a lot of ideas get stuck at the wayside because for political reasons. And it's things you might not think about, that there's politics in the scientific community, but there's politics everywhere. And you can't say that that does not play a part in what we view as being truth. You know, so a lot of these things we accept because theoretically they work out in our day-to-day exchange. It's a good enough answer, but is that really, you know, is that the whole answer? And that's my point, is I think it's things like this need to come along and be publicly spoken about so that we can go, maybe we don't have a full grasp on things. We obviously don't have all the answers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be surprised all the time by shit that happens.
Well, that's why I take it back to science, or what we call, air quotes, fact, is highly reproducible information. Within these constraints, you will get these outcomes. You know, I always equate it to, with these ingredients, you get cookie. May not be a good cookie, but it's still a cookie. So because we have that consistency, we take it in as literal fact.
Right. So that's a good example. So like a cookie or a special roll of bread that is made in a certain area. The water has certain
pH, chemicals,
certain chemicals,
nutrients,
certain minerals is what I was thinking.
Right.
The general altitude of the location plays a role.
Pressure differential.
In a bakery. that quite literally you could have all the same ingredients, but if you're ignoring all the things you can't physically see with your eyes, you're missing a whole nother piece of this. Like, why is it that I can't make Amoroso's rolls, which are famous in the area of Philadelphia? Why can't I make those in California? And it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
The altitude's wrong. The moisture in the air is wrong. The barometer's off. The water doesn't contain the right minerals. Like, how do you reproduce this?
Or the right quantity or combination of minerals.
I mean, and could you add those back in? I suppose. But then still can't make up for the fact that, like, what do you have to cook in a pressurized oven? Like, what do you...
Yeah, because you could be at a different altitude. I mean, and that's why, going to your point of we look at all of these things that we're being fed and we want to accept them as fact because we see them on a consistent basis. Well, just because they're consistent doesn't mean they're correct.
Right. How many of us have actually tested some of these theories that science says is law now?
I mean, probably plenty of us, but they'll just never publish those papers.
And I'm not gonna be one of those freaks that says there's no such thing as a law of gravity, because that's not the point I think that was trying to be made. Like, oh, well, gravity doesn't exist, and it's like, no, gravity is a byproduct of this other exchange.
Well, I believe it again was gravity is an understanding or an idea of an exchange.
Life exists because of light. Light becomes everything else.
Well, we are light.
In order to
light
do
is
that,
energy.
It has to go from a photon to a wave, basically. And the waveform is what creates reality. The waveform in this case happens to be the toroidal shape, that donut shape that's produced by basically repeating over and over again, what did we say, the golden mean, in 3 dimensions.
Spherical math.
This is how they figured this out.
Yeah.
Those 3 dimensions and all of those shapes that make up that toroidal shape, that is the flower of life on its side. It's the same thing. If you flip it the other way, you can see all the petals.
Yeah, that's why I like Terrance brought out a structure that he had made, and he's like, look at it, Joe. It's a square, right? And then he literally flips it onto a different side, and he's like, now you can see those differentials. But yet...
there's no straight lines.
It looks like a square.
Right.
But it's not. It's all about perception, but...
So just because you can perceive something with one of your senses...
doesn't mean it's right.
As a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what's actually there.
Yeah, which, I mean, I think this is a great place to stop because, there's still so much more to discuss on this. But
it really is. I could go on for days on this.
We could do 100 hours on this, but yeah, no, for real. I mean, this is part 2 of Terrance Howard at this point.
Part 2.
But yeah, fam, as always, we greatly appreciate you checking in. And just hit us in the comments. We want you to continue the conversation. This is why we do it, is because we love having these conversations.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah, discuss, absolutely. But yeah, as always, check us out. We got shorts, long form, all sorts of stuff. Tell us what you like, what you do, want more of. Tell us what you don't like and don't want more of. But
just tell us something.
Yeah, talk to us. Hit us in the comments.
We usually reply.
We always reply.
Well, we pretty much always reply.
I mean, it might take us a day or two, but we always reply. We will talk to you. Just got to talk to us. But yeah, Philly D.
Mr. Gemini.
And as we always say, be good to yourself, good to everything else.
Much love.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace. I had to throw JD's in there. Yeah, it's
word. Reaching for this and there's nothing.